badly.
No. Bites, bites, bites. That is what my fishing is all about at this time of year. The last thing I want to be doing is sitting at home in front of the fire, staying nice and warm. I want to get out on the bank, but I want to get bites. So what's the answer? I'm here at Lakeview. Lakeview Fishery, just outside Melton Mowbray. A fantastic venue. It's a beautiful place to be. But recently, they've just had an injection of new fish. A lot of venues up and down the country during the colder months, that's their time for stocking new fish. This place is no different. They've had loads of new fish introduced. That should mean loads of bites. I'm on one of my favourite lakes, Lagoon Lake, and hopefully I can take advantage of this massive influx of new fish. Welcome to Peg 6 on Lagoon Lake. Now, this lake in the past has been really kind to me. I remember quite a few years ago now when I used to fish this venue quite regularly. I was actually a few pegs down and I managed to win a 2-day event. Really big weight on the second day of the event, which actually won the 2-day event. I think I won either £1,000 or £1,500 in 2 days. Brilliant fishing it was. But you know what? This place, the thing I like about this venue, it's so peaceful. There's trees everywhere. It's a beautiful place to be. Now, obviously with all the new stocking that's gone on, this lake has had an injection of fish. There's some resident fish here as well. It's all a bit all over the place, whether to sit down the other end of the lake, the far side of the lake, I just don't know. So I've just sat on a peg that I think is going to be pretty reliable. Now, we're well into the colder months. My bait selection and tactics are going to reflect that. So, on my tray, I've been in the shop, I've got a few fishery micros and I've soaked them up. You can tell the fishery micros there because they've got little tracer pellets here that they put in the pellets, so when they check they can make sure you're using the correct bait. So these are Scretton's micros. I've added probably about a pint of micros to my little EVA tub and then added half a pint of water, give it a big shake up, left the pellets for 40 minutes and they're just about spot on now. They're just starting to soak all the way through. So they're going to be my feed for the day. Hook bait wise, we've got some 4mm expanders. Now to prepare these expanders, I empty a handful of expanders into a sandwich bag, add twice the amount of water to the expanders. So if I've added an egg cupful of expanders, I'll add 2 egg cupfuls of water to the bag. Tighten everything down so there's no air in the bag whatsoever. Get all those pellets and that water into a little corner of the bag, tighten it down, leave it for an hour or so, and what you're going to have at the end of that is some really soft expanders. They've taken on the water, they're going to be sort of semi-buoyant, which means I'll just have to give them a little bit of a squeeze in that excess water there just before I put them on the hook to make sure they sink. But what we've got is an expander that holds its form a little bit better than when you pump a bait. When you pump a bait, you're pulling the air through the bait really fast. I think sometimes it can break down the bait from inside. So, you know when you're getting those crumbly pellets later on in a session, you're putting a pellet on, it's falling off halfway out when you're shipping out. That just doesn't happen with doing it that way, with preparing those pellets that way. So, few pellets, expanders, 4mm expanders, and some micros. We've also got on the subs bench a tin of corn. This is just some Dynamite XL sweet corn. If we get pestered by smaller fish and I feel there's some bigger fish around, I think corn could be a really good bait. Also, looking at the colour of the water, the colour of this lake, you can probably see 18 inches down, something like that. So I think a bright bait, once the colour drops out of a lake, is going to be the way to go. Now, I'm going to have a ship out and have a go fishing because I've already had a plumb up. I've already found a nice area to fish. I'm going to fish towards the far bank. I'm not going to go tight to the far bank because I want to give the fish somewhere to back off to if I need to later on. But I always feel that during a winter session, the fish are always looking to push away from you. So I could maybe start very short, try and catch an odd fish, but I think I'd do that in a match, just to rest the rest of my swim. But for today's session, for a bit of a pleasure session, I'm going to fish a bit further out. The swim I've got earmarked, it's 11 metres out, slightly to my left, and it's just at the bottom of the shelf. The shelf on this particular lake is really steep, so I imagine that those fish want to sit just at the bottom of that far shelf. It's far enough away from the angler to make the fish feel safe, but also it's not in that really shallow water that is probably only a foot deep up against those reeds and rushes, where you'd probably find the fish in the summer months. Now, I've plumbed this rig up, but because of the small amount of baits we're going to feed, it's going to be quite nomadic. I'm going to be moving around the swim. If I catch a couple of fish there and it goes a little bit quiet, I'll put a plummet on, I'll plumb up somewhere else in the swim, maybe try and catch a couple more fish and sort of work my way around the peg as the session goes on, and hopefully I don't exhaust any area of my peg. I've seen, as I walked in, I've seen a dark shape under the water. It looked like a ball of fish, and each time I keep going back to my van for little bits of kit, I'm seeing that ball move around, obviously as I'm making commotion on the bank as well. So even though it's winter, these fish are responding to everything you're doing on the bank. And if I catch a couple of fish, I imagine that that little area is going to be blown and I'm going to have to move. So I think by feeding small amounts of bait and just being a little bit, like I say, nomadic around my peg, I've got a chance of hopefully keeping bites coming throughout the day. So I'll talk about the rig once we're fishing. There's my pellet on the hook. I've rolled my 4mm onto the hook. That's a size 16. And I've tied it to 010, which is very supple and light. Perfect for this time of year, unless we were targeting massive carp. My little pot, I've got a tiny little pot. Let's see how many pellets that holds, because that is a tiny little pot. It literally holds, you can see there in my hand, maybe 20 pellets, something like that. So a real small amount of bait. And I'm just going to lightly squeeze them in and we'll have a ship out. I've got a 4-inch hook length, load of leaves on the water, so I'm having to sort of miss them. I've got a 4-inch hook length. This rig is shotted with number 10 shot, with the last one obviously above that hook length. And those shot are strung out in the bottom quarter of the rig, I'm saying. So we can sort of zoom the float or the bait down towards the bottom, and then we can gently lower everything down, and those shot are just keeping everything tight down there, whilst not being a big clunky bulk of shot. So we're going to hold everything out, lower it down. Obviously you know what it's like, sometimes your float takes a little bit of time to start working correctly, but I think that's about right. And now we're looking for any sort of little dink on that. Oh, little dink straight away, that's a good sign. Like I say, I don't know whether we're fishing in an area where those stockfish will be, or whether we could be on a few older residents. Hopefully there's a little mixture of both, but you know what, it's just about getting a few bites this time of year. If I can get out the house, get a few bites, that suits me. Like I say, it's a great place to be, this is. Nice and peaceful, birds and trees everywhere. You feel like you're in the countryside, which obviously that's what fishing's all about. I've got about 3.5 to 4 foot of water where I'm fishing, and I'm using a 4x12 float. Now in the summer months, 4x12s would be way too light for that depth of water. It'd be getting held up by small fish, or it'd be getting moved around by fin movement from bigger fish. But for this time of year, lighter is quite often best. And you can see there's literally no wind on the water at all. So we can use a nice light float, we can dot it down, so there's very little resistance to any fish. And if we wanted to, a little indication then, if we wanted to, we could maybe try and fish this rig on the drop, so lay it into the side and sort of hold on to it. I mean, it's going to be a bit awkward today with those leaves, but we might be able to give that a go a little bit later. So we had a bite almost, or an indication straight away, didn't we? But I don't know yet whether these fish are willing to feed in the depth that I'm fishing, or whether they're a little bit shallower. Very early stages, isn't it? So you've really got to take your time. Once the water temperatures drop, I mean, we're talking about water temperatures here of sort of like 6 or 7 degrees, which is really cold. Those fish just need loads of time to start feeding and to start aggressively getting their heads down. Well, as you can see, folks, the weather has took a little bit of a turn. All of a sudden it started to become a little bit more wintry with some really cold drizzle, but we've started to catch a few fish. Early on, I've got to tell you, it was slow, very slow. But we have made a bit of a tactical change, and we've started catching a few. And I'll explain it in a minute because, like I say, weather conditions have changed. The fishing's improved. I don't think this is a stocky fish. We've had a couple of little F1s and a couple of little carp. Look like very fresh fish. But this definitely isn't a little tiny stocky. This is a decent fish, this is. We've got an orange reactor core elastic, which is probably about, it's a hollow elastic, stretches a long way. Probably the equivalent to a number 8 elastic, something like that. Obviously on the puller, so we can pull a little bit out. And I like a nice soft elastic in the winter because we're fishing light lines, 010 hook length. Come on, mate, up you come. You can see him way down there. The water's a lot clearer than I thought. Could probably see him 3 foot down then. And that's probably the reason, with the water being so clear, that the fishing was so slow to get off the mark, because I think our commotion, setting up, getting all the cameras and all that jazz sorted, has probably put the fish on edge, and they've probably, as is often the case on a lot of these commercials, probably spooked off down the front of the lake. There we go. Beautiful little common. Sorry, a mirror. Hold him up for you, and then we'll talk through the change that we've made, because it's something that I think we overlook a little bit. Look at this for a cracking fish. 3.5, 4 pound he is, and he is a brilliant fish to catch on a cold day. When it is cold, let me tell you, he is freezing, that fish. Right, so off the subs bench, we've got the maggots. We've just been to the shop because pellets just weren't cutting it. The water, as I've just seen with that fish, is freezing cold. The water's really clear. I think we want something that's slower falling. We want something that's gonna get us a bite. And we've had a few little silverfish, we've had some skimmers, we've had obviously some smaller F1s. Maggots have been brilliant. Fishing them through the water, still potting them in like we were the pellets, but fishing them through the water. So just spreading out the shot in a little tiny bit compared to how I was when I was fishing pellets. And again, we don't need loads of bait. We've just got literally a few maggots out, and we're just rattling a few maggots in. What I don't want to be doing is spreading bait all around my swim. So we're still using a pole pot. So we've got double maggot there, double white maggot, a nice bright bait in this clear water. And then in our pot, we're not going mad, we've probably just a dozen maggots, something like that. We've still got the same rig on as we were using for pellets. We're fishing in the same place. I think location early on was a factor, but more because we've pushed the fish away from our fishing position rather than the fish didn't want to be there. So fish want to be in that area, it's just that we have to give them the right bait, and just felt we were off the mark a little bit with those pellets. So we're going to lay this in now. We can fish the maggots in a different way. We can lay the rig into the side, we can hold the float on a tight line, and we can look for those little tiny dinks on the float just as it settles, which is, there we go, there we go. Look at that, spot on, textbook that was. Oh, he's come off, it was a skimmer. I've seen it under the surface, a little skimmer flapping away. Probably just didn't set the hook properly. Now there we go. It's annoying, isn't it? Maggot doubled over the point of the hook. It was only a small fish. Quite often with a small fish and a double bait, they don't take the bait properly. But we'll go again. This is the good thing as well about fishing with maggots. You get bites from everything. So we're going to go in that pot. A dozen maggots. Lay that rig in and just try and keep it falling on a tight line, so holding the float all the time, and just as you think it's getting probably, I don't know, a foot off the bottom, that's when quite often you'll get that little tiny sort of rattle on the float. It sort of dinks, a little sharp dink on the float, and you've got to hit those bites. You've got to react to those bites. That's why we've got a reasonably short line between pole tip and float. The carp that I've had 2 or 3 carp now, but they've been caught sort of sitting, waiting over my bait. But the F1s that I've caught, and obviously the silverfish I've caught, have been as the bait falls through the water. So it's obviously those carp want to get their heads down on a bit of bait, and the F1s are a little bit more cuter. They're sitting probably mid-water watching the bait fall down, just picking odd little bits off. Let's have another drop through. The leaves have gone as well now, so it's making it a little bit easier to put that rig through the water. What I'm not particularly keen on is lifting the rig sort of 30 centimetres and dropping it back in. There's a time and a place for that, but I don't think in clear water, when we're not looking for many bites, it's the right thing to do. I'd rather lift the whole rig out and put the rig in again. I'm sure that maybe if we were on a pile of fish and there was loads of fish down there, we could get away with just lifting the rig and dropping it again. I think it's a little bit lazy. There we go. Just as that bait was settling and a tiny little bite, we've got another fish. Fishing's good now. The fishing is very good. We've not had many of those little stockies, have we? But I'm happy catching these fish. It's a cracking way of getting out on the bank and catching a few fish. So while a lot of people will probably say commercial fisheries that ram full of fish and it's like shooting fish in a barrel sometimes, well, yeah, you can get loads of bites in the summer. Sometimes the fishing can be too much for me in the summer on these places, but you know what, if you've got a place near you that's got loads of fish in it or have just been stocked with fish, which a lot of venues are this time of year, winter's the time for stocking fish. If you've got a place like that near you and it's a toss-up between sitting on the sofa in front of the fire or getting out and catching, oh, he's freezing, catching some beautiful little fish like this guy. Come on, mate, stay still for us. Little carp like that, I think I'd rather go fishing. So I'm really enjoying my day. The switch to maggots has made all of the difference. I'm going to carry on fishing. I'm going to try and enjoy this last hour or so of sunlight. Until next time, folks, tight lines.